We are live.
Right on. So today, actually, this is our first. I think this is the first time, even with PBF, that I've had somebody participating that's not in the military. We've got Father Turbo Qualls joining us. We've wanted to branch out with a number of different people at times. We've talked about it. We've never actually executed on it, but I think um, we get a lot of questions at times from you guys here in the audience about, various questions. And I think the last podcast too, I spoke to this specifically with Doc. So one of the challenges that I find a lot of times is that I don't even want to talk about things sometimes because I'm not sure that I've got the authority to speak on these things. So I always like to say, hey, look, I'm not a priest. But what do I do if I'm not a priest? I go and get a priest. And so joining Doc and I today is Father Turbo Qualls. Father, thank you for joining us.
It's my joy. How's it going, guys?
It's going well. Yeah, thank you for taking the time and everything. I think, you know, there's I'd like for us to cover some basic ideas here. Doc's a little bit newer. I mean, I'm probably what, like, Doc's in preschool and I'm in kindergarten as far as the Orthodox faith goes, and um, I won't speak for you, but I know you're definitely a few grades ahead of me, if not a whole at multiple levels. So what we'd like to do is just talk about some basic ideas and things. Is I think first though, what I'd like to start out, because I think there may be some people who may not be familiar with you. So if you wouldn't mind, just kind of giving a little bit of a background on yourself, and maybe what drew you to the Orthodox faith and kind of where you are now.
We're good.
I don't know. Did we lose him?
You hear me?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I got muted somehow. Okay.
Oh. Okay. Yeah. No worries.
Sorry
Well,
about that.
yeah, we're good.
So I guess the best way to start. I'm from Southern California. I grew up in Southern California. Excuse me, in the late '80s and the '90s, and Southern California at that time was kind of a hotbed for lots of culture, namely like punk rock and things like that. And so I was involved with that pretty early on, and that's important because it gave me it built out a capacity for me to look at the world from a different lens and I guess question certain popular narratives, popular paradigms about life, and just basically being okay with going against the grain, for better or for worse. And so, I grew up in that milieu of subculture and everything that kind of comes with that. And so, probably around, oh gosh, the mid '90s, the end of the '90s. I had, a series of events that led me to, a active faith and pursuit of Christian spirituality, Christ, and that began a kind of like another chapter. And that I followed that path mainly, kind of evangelical, non-denominational Christianity. Um, and I did that for a number of years. And I got married early. I got married in 2000, and had my first child at 2000 into 2001, and kind of like turned another chapter. And it was around this time that I was introduced. Kind of like not directly to the Orthodox Church, but to Orthodoxy, if I can make that distinction. And I guess that'll come into play later if we talk more. So, and that was primarily through an icon of Jesus Christ. Now, a couple things to fill in some gaps. I was a tattoo artist, and I had been at that point in time a tattoo artist for like 5-6 years at that point. And so being an artist and being and tattooing in the '90s, even up into the mid '90s, late '90s, was a very different animal than it is today. So culture wise, it was a very different animal. That's kind of important too. Um, so this convergence of kind of art and subculture and um,
Father,
you
could
know
I interrupt you?
sure.
Um, Pardon me. I just was curious. So when you talk about it was different, could you maybe just give a little of a contrast of what it is now versus what it was then?
Sure. So I can't speak for anywhere else, but in California, and I'll say those who are from California, they know to say California in general. Like no one ever says California because California is like three states put together. If you're from California, Um, but I say that because in regards to the tattoo community, it's like spending time up north in Frisco and really. that period of time, for quote unquote body modification, subculture, whatever, tattooing and piercing is very different. It was still a very underground, um, but it was a good sweet time because around 90, between 90 and 93, you began to see an influx of artists into tattooing, like Philip Blue and Grime, and saw these great people who were bringing in a different quality to tattooing, and it wasn't just because some of the stereotypes are true. I mean, when I first started getting interested in tattooing, it was really tough because um, it was a certain strata of people, um, the biker and all that stuff. That was kind of the thing, certain Chicano culture. That was another side of it too. And then like I was in the kind of like punk rock end of it, which really didn't have much um, connection to the industry in regards of being in shops. That was more like underground and scratching and things like that. So, there's this whole influx like graffiti and all these things that was coming in at that time. And so what that did was um, it was this really sweet time because it moved it out of just a really, really, I mean, it's always been niche, but it's like a really small section of people. And it brought in this really creative element to it and it made it much more open. But it wasn't, it was still very underground. It was still very taboo. Um, and it didn't have the, since then, right? And really with the proliferation of things like Miami Ink was like the first show, and then Ink Masters and all that stuff. With anything else, exposure through TV and things like that, it really began to get watered down, and it just changed. Like for instance,
Sure.
you didn't get into it unless you were apprenticed, like period.
Hmm. Hmm.
Or you were incredibly either gutsy and just kind of did your own thing and people respected that, or you were so talented that you kind of like people had to accept you. And those people were very few. The vast majority of us got in through an apprenticeship, and the apprenticeship had everything to do with who you knew, not so much what you did, if that makes sense. So
And that was really kind of grinding work. Like you were just a gopher in a lot of shops as well, weren't you?
oh a lot more than just a gopher. I mean, you were a runner.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean. Like
Yeah.
you were putting your freedom on the line, if you understood what I'm talking about. So
Yep.
so it was very different. Um, and so with this new thing, and it's just you know it's a different animal. And
Sure.
I don't want to be that old man who's like, oh, these kids today. I don't want to say like that, but it was a different animal for sure.
Yeah, totally understand. So sorry, I felt it was kind of good, to give
Yeah,
that contrast to
no, it's
where
good.
things are now.
Also, out
It's good.
of curiosity, Father, what part of SoCal are we talking about here? Because I'm from
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
SoCal.
yeah. So Orange County, Orange County,
Okay.
OC.
OC. Yeah, yeah.
So,
So
and you were like Anaheim kind of area, weren't you?
yeah, Anaheim, Fullerton, Orange. The shop I printed at was in Orange. Um, at that time, actually, it's another thing. If anyone knows Orange, California, like at that time, there was only two tattoo shops in all of that, in all of Orange County, in all of Orange, the city of Orange, and then like maybe five, maybe, you know, um, in Orange County at that time. And so I
And,
worked
and
in
I'm
another.
I'm just thinking too, Father. With the Orange County too, you had like the Huntington Beach punk
Yeah, yeah,
rock
yeah,
scene
yeah,
and stuff like that.
yeah,
You know,
yeah, for
and the
sure,
influence that had.
for sure, for sure, for sure. So that was all in play. And so yeah, it was. I mean, like I said, everybody thinks, well, everybody except for like kids now, they think they grew up in a sweet time. So I grew up in a sweet time. It was good.
Yeah.
Um,
There wasn't a cell phone in sight.
Man, there wasn't a cell phone in sight. It was funny too because I was just thinking about this while I was trying to put this Telegram thing on my desktop. I was like, but I mean, it wasn't that long ago. I was completely digitally technologically illiterate. Like I remember, I mean, I didn't have a cell phone or know how to really like. I grew up with a Commodore 64, but like having to actually do all this stuff, it was thank God,
Yeah.
because I'd be so. I mean, it was a series of events, and I hate to say that, but if certain things didn't happen, I don't know where I would be because people don't understand if you really don't. It is like the beast system. If you don't have a certain degree of connectivity, you're lost. I mean, you. It's so tough, and that's kind of funny because it plays in this whole thing with tattooing, even with Orthodoxy. I mean, so much for the better has been made possible because of the proliferation of technology, but everything comes with a price. Everything comes with a
Mhm.
cost. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's sort of that thing too now where I find I have so much respect for, Mennonites and the Amish and people like that have managed to survive in this world without that technology. When I was the one who used to look down on those people because they couldn't do it, and I was like, "Oh, you don't know how to do this?" You know what I mean? Really snidely. And now I'm
yeah,
like, "Wow." The Watchers, they definitely brought some things for us, didn't they?
oh for sure, for sure. So yeah, it's interesting too because the this whole situation in regards of watching things change in a lifetime, and I mean Orthodoxy it's no different too because it's a very 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 different thing. Even in my short time coming to the church, my wife and I we came into the church 2005.
And
Um,
and you started to
and
mention about that too, because you said it was you got into. Did you say you got into Orthodoxy, but you didn't become Orthodox? Is that how you described it?
well, I was introduced to Orthodoxy, but not the Orthodox Church. So in other words, what I
Yeah.
mean is, um, I encountered an icon. Someone had given me a book about Orthodoxy, but Orthodoxy as a praxis, as a way of life, a paradigm, all that good stuff. It's distinct, although not separate, I guess, from the church, which is the body of people, right? Um,
Yes.
and so I would say that's like really important to understand because people become quickly enamored with orthodoxy, which it's the most beautiful thing ever. But the problem for a lot of people becomes when they start actually encountering the Orthodox Church, and that's where a lot of people they'll begin to kind of hiccup and sputter a little bit, and they just need the right kind of on ramp. They just need the right kind of coaching because it's just part of it, when you're dealing with people. But I love the church, and I don't know. I thought that'd be an interesting distinction to make for people because um, one of the things that can happen is you can hear someone like yourself talk, or maybe me, I guess, and people could really like to hear what's being said and they can resonate some of the truth, but then orthodoxy can't be lived out in your head. That's something that is tough for people to wrap their minds around. You can't read about it, study about it, watch YouTube videos, and be orthodox. You have to, in order to be orthodox, you have to be with orthodox people. You have to be within the body, if you understand what I'm saying. And so, um,
Yeah,
this
and I think that's important too, because I know I've run into that sometimes with people as well to understand that because the church is the body of Christ, and a lot of people, especially people that are autodidactic, self learners, kind of stuff like that, because there is, I think, at least with what I found, and I'm not trying to say this in any way bad about anyone else or anything like that, but a lot of the people that I have run into in Orthodox churches or even, at times online as well in the community. But you've got a group of people who they think a little more deeply about things, and that's part of why they like the church. But at the same time too, there are those who are attracted to that level of it, whether it's the church fathers or something like that they found, but then it's that next step, right?
Right. And it is the next step. And it's really important too, because when people are living in an isolated sense of just what they've read, they can conflate having information with experience, and they're not the same thing. Um, or I should say, they can conflate information with knowledge, and they're not the same thing. And so, in order for information to become knowledge, you have to have experience, and experience is a lived thing. It can't be, you can't grasp or enter to experience from like discursive thought. You have to, it's existential, so
So
this
then,
is like, mhm.
oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. Please continue.
Oh no, I was just gonna say. So this is just like an important thing to really to get a hold of, because again, I mean, I hate to say it, sound like, and I sound like an old man, but it wasn't that long ago. I mean, I remember going to some, like, it was like an event, it was at a monastery in California, a new monastery that had just started, and like a book fair, whatever, and you know there was very little um, in regards of English, like very little. And this is the mid '90s, um, and the explosion. I mean, it's truly without like hyperbole. It's exponential, the amount of stuff on Orthodoxy and on the church that's out there, that's in English and stuff, and that's still nothing. I mean, still the vast majority of stuff hasn't been translated into English, and so it's good to keep that in mind, because on the other hand too, it's like, um, you'll get it by living it. You know what I mean?
Well, it creates, for what I found, and I'll speak for myself, and you've witnessed more people, so you can speak to this, and maybe even Doc, you can talk about yourself. I know for me, there were a lot of things that people talked about in reference to Orthodoxy that I didn't understand, and even like sort of the mystical side of the church and things like that. I wasn't completely sure, kind of, what it was they were talking about, but it's one of those things as I've participated. I think especially after I became chrismated and participating in the gifts, the Eucharist, the communion, to participate in that has helped a lot. And then getting to know you and learning a lot from you, in watching a lot of videos too as well that you've participated in. You as we haven't talked about this yet, but we should put a link to this on here as well. You do have a podcast that's really good as well called The Royal Path, but there's a lot of other discussions. But it's exploring it in that way. But I think most of all, participating in the church, going to the services. And I'm not, I could, I've made it to some services. I'm probably not the best as attending every service possible sometimes work gets in the way and things like that. But I think that has made a big difference for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest things to understand too, is that when you lose sight of the actual participation that's necessary, then what you're left with is like a caricature, if that makes sense, And the reality is that what we're trying to do is we're trying to encounter God, and we encounter God through primarily the services and the sacraments, and I think the thing is for a lot of people, what they struggle with is that it feels like a bunch of magical thinking. If that makes sense, they're like, well, what do you
Yes.
mean? if I just do this, if I just do this, if I just go to these services and I just kind of, do all this stuff, you mean I'm going to encounter God? Yeah. Yeah, you will. But but
Well,
but the but the context though, and I hate, forgive me, but the devil's in the details. It's like it isn't just kind of like going there on automatic pilot. What it is it it becomes a doorway. It's a touch point by which um, these moments. Everyone's had these moments. I don't care who you are. Military, not military, man, woman. Like it doesn't matter. Everyone has had these moments when they've encountered a flash or a glimpse of something bigger than themselves. You know what I mean? And those flashes and those are those moments can be um, not just sustainable, but they can be zoomed in on. They can become instead of just kind of like, oh, what was that? They become um, almost like the lens by which you begin to experience your whole life, and that's a wonderful thing. But it takes you really coming outside of yourself in a way that is um, very odd for us, especially in the time that we're living in the place that we're living in. You know.
well, to that point, Father, I think people are looking for that, but they're looking for that outside of Christianity, and that might be something that they're encountering through yoga or even, the DMT experience or something like that. Because we have, in my opinion, uh, we've stripped out that element in a lot of ways in Western Christianity through the accepting Enlightenment thought and placing Christianity within the box of Enlightenment thought. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 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 and it's one of those things where there's this weird paradox, like um, a lot of people. When I talk to people, a lot of people have never ate a salad before. Do you know what I mean by that?
A lot of people have never ate a salad before. I don't know
Yeah.
what you mean.
Okay. So a lot of people they've had salad dressing with maybe some lettuce and a tomato. You know what I mean? But they've never
Okay.
just yeah, yeah. Their people are used to just being so oversaturated with like their senses and do you see what I'm saying? That if
Hmm.
I was to tell someone, oh, just try eating a salad with just a little bit of olive oil, salt, and like pepper, and it's actually much more delicious.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
people will look at you like you're crazy. Uh, but the thing is like if you do this, what you'll find is that um, the those original elements which constitute a salad, there's something wonderful that has been really kind of hidden from you because of this really kind of actual gross um, habit that we have of needing to have everything soaked in something just like over the top. Everything's over the top for us. You know what I mean? Like um, a woman can't be a woman anymore. She has to be a Swedish bikini model, right? Uh, like I could just
Oh,
go
what
on.
is a woman?
I'm a medical
Man, we should
professional, and
talk
even
about
then, I
that. We
don't
should
know.
talk about that. That was
You know what?
excellent.
I'd be happy to talk about that. Could we go through a few of just some of the basics here? I would like, just to cover maybe some differences between sort of Orthodoxy, Roman Catholicism, Protestantism, some of that. Talk about icons a bit and talk about confession. I think those are some
Sure,
of the things
sure.
that would be
Let me
good.
just
And then
finish this
let's go
one
for
thought,
that.
though. Let me just finish this thought because people are like, "What the heck is this guy talking about salad dressing?" All right, so
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
so the thing is with Enlightenment thought, and everything that brought, what it's done is people think that you need to have DMT, you need to have yoga, you need to have something over the top to experience God. And that's why so many people are lost, because it's much easier to experience God in the smile of a child than it is watching a Disney show. It's much more easier to experience God, you know, eating some freshly grilled, salmon or whatever, sitting with someone, and I know that sounds sappy to people, but just so we're clear, I was in Iraq in 2002, 2003. I was in Kosovo in 2001. Uh, Unfortunately, I've been, incarcerated. I've been in the street, so like I've seen it. Um, the reason why I'm throwing out there, I'm not trying to get points with anyone. I'm trying to say I've seen horrific things, and I'm just telling you that leads you, this what the world tells us, including, you know, trying to dope us up, but all the different things are actually making it worse. And that sense of like needing something over the top, that's part of the problem. Once you recognize that that's part of what's keeping you from experiencing God, then it becomes so much more easier. So I just wanted to kind of close that loop so people understood kind of like why I went there.
Well,
Because
and if I could,
Orthodoxy,
I'm sorry.
forgive me, because I was just gonna say, because with Orthodoxy, people can look at it and they can just like seraphims and cherubims and God doing this and burning bushes and all this stuff. It's like, people can really get turned off and think that it's like a one giant role playing game, and it's not. It's not. It's incredibly profound and deep. It's through simplicity that we begin to experience this. So that's what I want to say. Forgive me.
And actually, funny that you
No,
kind of say
Father,
that.
absolutely. And I would like to just add on top of that, I think that finding simplicity is difficult and frightening.
Yeah.
Well, there's nothing to hide behind.
Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, funny that you mentioned that. I think it was last week where it was ascension. Like it came to a moment in liturgy where like you're correctly like once you take away all these extra things and then you're just quietly and you're praying, and as the liturgy was going on, I don't know at what point it happened, and then like I felt this peace like I'd never felt before, and like it overtook me, and it was like the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced, like nothing like ever before. Like no offense to like all the other Protestant homies, but it's like you take away everything and then you just listen to the prayers and throughout the liturgy, and it was like nothing ever experienced before. It's like you said, like you take away all this extra stuff and you have the things that you need, and it just completely takes it on another level.
Completely.
And it's almost too like when you start to look at food as sustenance versus pleasure.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that once you begin to do that, then you're actually able to encounter food as a sacrament, which is pleasurable, but now it's stripped of all the abuse. Do you know what I'm saying? It's stripped
Yep.
of the abuse, and that's the problem, because food is supposed to be pleasurable, but we think that, again, it's not pleasurable for a married man to be to be intimate with his wife who he's committed his life to, and they sacrifice raising children. Like, that's not fun and sexy. What's fun and sexy is go get yourself a hot 20-year-old. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's that. Forgive me, I people are probably scandalized because I'm a priest, but I'm just saying, like, I'm being real. This is the type of stuff that leads people astray. You know what I
But
mean?
Father, the beer commercial says that they need to get the 20-year-old.
Exactly. And so the thing is that this is, I mean, for when I was in the streets, quote unquote, and doing my thing, it's like if someone was to tell me, the best time I would have would be, eating some venison with some brothers and my kids playing out in the field and my wife sitting with other women, and you know what I mean. If someone was to tell me
Yeah,
like that, those are the best times I've ever had, I'd be like, "What are you talking about? That
yeah,
sounds like terribly boring." You know what I mean? Like, but but it is. You know what I mean? If someone's to
yes.
tell me, like Doc was saying, it's like, when I was in the midst of, in the Mission District, just out of my mind on LSD, like, oh, actually, the most profound, deep experiences you were gonna have were gonna be holding a prayer rope with in a very, very dark closet in your house. You know what I mean? Like, I'd be like, what are you talking about? That's, you know what I mean?
Well, you know
So
what, too, Father? I think about with that as well because I did some heavy duty exploring of all those things, and you know what I came out of often. I was going into it thinking, especially when I was doing artwork, that suddenly my artwork was going to get magnificent, right? Like
right.
suddenly I was going to do this, and you know what? My artwork and my writing got worse because I was no longer relying
Yeah, yeah,
upon
yeah.
myself.
Makes total sense. It makes total sense.
And I couldn't accept that. To me, that's almost as well sort of that paradigm you reach with the pharmakia,
Yeah.
the legal pharmakia.
Hmm.
When I was really depressed and I was, thrown on like Paxil and Xanax and whatever else, and then I would, drink a bottle of whiskey on top of that just to try to make the pain go away, kind of thing.
Right.
And not realizing that those medications weren't making me feel better. Like they're supposed to make me feel better, but why aren't they making me feel better? That it's hard to cross that shift in the mind because you're expecting it. You're told it should.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's a whole thing, and it kind of connects us back to the life of the church because there's so many influences telling you, which way to go, what to do, how to feel, how to get better, all that stuff. And it's like if you're left to your own devices, it's almost it is impossible to try to find a way out, and that's where the church comes in, and the tradition of the church comes in, and it's just like it's this rope in the midst of this incredible quicksand, and you just grab the rope and keep, holding on and following it out, and you'll get out. You will.
So, Father, could you give me an elevator pitch? And if this is too limiting, however much time you need, what makes orthodoxy orthodoxy and what differentiates it from things like Roman Catholicism or Protestantism, evangelism, Calvinism, whatever? Evangelism.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just gonna turn some things on their head. I mean, honestly, the big thing is that orthodoxy is the revelation of God as proven and delivered through his prophets, his chosen people, his saints, people who have experienced him, and and all those other things are the traditions of men. And those traditions of men, I mean, there's benefit there. I don't want to be disingenuous to say that there isn't a benefit, but um, orthodoxy is pure and uncut. That's the best way to put it.
This is the flake.
Yeah, like, and so when you kind of understand, then we say in the church, oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Once you can wrap your mind around it, you have to taste for yourself. I think that's the biggest thing that I would stress today is just like all this is good, whatever, and I pray to God that I don't turn anybody off or scandalize anybody, but like unless you taste for yourself, it kind of doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? Um, because I guarantee you, if you, and of course, like with anything else, it's just like this is the real stuff, so you got to be careful. You know what I mean? Like you can't just go in there willy nilly because you might, you don't want to overdose or something. So like you really want to really go in there with wisdom, and you want to go in there with humility above all things, because A lot of people I've seen it so many times. People come in guns blazing. They think they know. They think this. They think that. A couple years they get chewed up and spit out. And God has them. And what I've seen is it takes a couple more years for them to come back around because they've been humbled. But I've known people who like they came in like I just came out of Bible college. I've seen it all. You know what I mean? And um, no guidance, no humility, and then they ran right into the wall, and they're gone for a couple years. But then I've seen them; they come back and they're like, man, that was rough, and they get in their action, if that makes sense, um, and then once they've been humbled, though, they can come and um, they can see the church, they can see God uh, as
Well,
He is.
humility is a hard thing to have in this world, especially, I mean, look at the month that we are in now, but look at how people get most of their oxytocin and their self-worth in our age. It's something that's completely opposed to humility.
Absolutely opposed to it, you know. So
I can only imagine what you deal with from your end because I know the struggles that I have had myself. Just thinking whatever I was special at or good at or whatever. And oftentimes, even, fake it till you make it kind of things. And I think there's validity to a certain level of fake it till you make it in certain things in life. But when you're operating from that perspective, there's way too much fake and not enough, and not any make.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I There is real validity to fake it till you make it. I mean, St. John Chrysostom. I mean, excuse me, St. John Kronstadt, Saint Thief, and the Recluse. They'll say things like that. You know what I mean? But there's always the connection to it. So in other words, they'll say, this is Thief and the Recluse. He says, if you don't have feelings of love, do acts of love, and the feelings will come. You know what I mean? Now, there's a context there, right? The context is that you are the church. You know what I mean? And that the grace of God is there to help you with that, right? He's not just saying that as a self-help guru and any Tom, Dick, and Harry on the street reading that like, okay, sounds good. It's like um, there's context, right? But there is validity to it. But in the life of the church, there's way more make it than there is fake it. Because
Mhm.
the thing is we're dealing with God, and that's the other thing that's important to understand. We're not talking about this is like our systems, and this is like this is God, and God. We can't do anything without God. Jesus says, "Abide in me, and I in you." Unless you abide in me, you can do nothing, and it's the truth. So for us, some people want to fake humility, but like for us, we don't have to because we know we can't do it without God.
Hmm. So let me shift a little bit here to um, why is an icon not a graven image? What makes that different?
Sure. Because an icon is so a graven image, an idol is a part made the whole. And so there's inherent falseness to it. An icon is an icon because it's connected and revealing something that's true and something that's living. So why did God in that commandment prohibit the graven image? Because at that point in time, man and his man had not received the full revelation of God, obviously, and the the proclivity towards idolatry is very strong. It's still strong in man. It's just a different shape. Instead of golden idols, it's golden chains and cars. But like the point being is the icon is a window to heaven, and what is heaven? Heaven is people and God connected. So the halo and the icon, that's like the wedding ring between God and the human being. And we can depict Christ because Christ is God in the flesh. And God in the flesh, he wasn't a ghost, he wasn't a fairy tale. and he is the image of the invisible God, as it says in Colossians. So when we look upon the icon of Christ, we look upon the truth that God became incarnate in the world for our sakes. When we look upon the icon of the Mother of God, we look upon the fact that God became incarnate in the world for our sake through the Holy Virgin Mary, right? When we look upon the icon of Saint George, we realize that God, has worked and lived, has worked and shared a life with this incredible soldier, right? It's just these things are true. And Saint John Damascene, when he talks about this, he's like, when we venerate, not worship, but when we venerate, when we show respect to the icon, or that respect goes from the icon to the person, right? Um, when I was in, I'll give you an example. When I was in Iraq, when I was in Kosovo, a lot of times I had pictures of my wife and my kid at the time. And when I was missing them, when I was, having the blues, I kissed the picture, right? Um,
Hmm.
that was a real thing. I really did it. TV was worshiping. Uh, you know, picture was I thinking that the picture was my wife? No, but was that love that I was expressing by kissing the picture that I missed my wife? Absolutely.
Hmm.
I think most
Icon,
military people
the
would.
icon is not an idol because in the same sense that the picture isn't an idol. You know what I mean? Of my wife, it's not an idol. So
Funny enough, mention that, Father, because I think most of us in the military would kind of understand that. Like, if you have like a family, or like when we're on deployment and we do the same thing. Like, we have pictures, family, friend, or whoever, and we kiss and like because we miss them, and it's not a matter of like praising them or anything. But yeah, so I think that
that
usually
connection,
answers a lot of things like that.
yeah, it's that connection. It's the connection. You know? And
And I
so we're
think
connected with God and His saints.
I was only going to say too to that point to the saints, Father. You may continue. I don't want to interrupt if you were going to add to the saints.
Yeah, yeah. It's just that connection is real. And that's one of those things where what you'll find in Orthodoxy is there's a lot of the fathers in the church will take so much of our natural experience as an analogy because it is. It's like our connection to our loved ones. The reason why we have that connection is because that's how God made us. And anybody who's been through anything and that you feel that real loss and that separation from a loved one, you feel that because the connection is real. You don't miss something that isn't real, if that makes sense. Like
Hmm.
that love and that connection is real, and so it's the same thing with God. Like all those things are just they're all there to point us to the that's wonderful. That's just points us to the love of God. So
Well, and I think too that one of the points, and I think you've made this before, and I've heard this in other places too. What people fail to recognize when they talk about when you're seeking the intercession of a saint is they're living.
right,
You know, it's not as if, and let's think of this. I mean, a simple way. We talked about the photographs of our family and stuff like that time. How many times do people ask even for the help of a relative who's no longer on earth? You'll hear that a lot of times,
that's right.
you know? And these are our family that are no longer on earth. They're
Yeah,
part of the church.
yeah, that's right. That's right. And so I think one of the ways to kind of understand this too is that whatever we're going to talk about now at this point, whether it's icons, whether it's um, I don't know, the sacraments. I mean, everything is kind of like a shadow of the reality. You know what I mean? That leads us into the bigger thing. And that's important to understand because what the church does, what Orthodoxy does, is it purifies and it illumines. It purifies, it illumines, and then it goes even bigger than that. It like it's like listening. It's like watching something in black and white, and then it becomes IMAX with full color, like and surround sound. It's like all of life, all the details of life begin to pop out because it's there's that paradox of stripping away all the noise that we are like immersed in allows us to really see what's there. So much of what God has created is hidden under just the plastic of the reality that we live in. You know, it's like plastic. It's like you can see through it. It's there, but it's just like if you've been living, if you've been living in a bubble, in a plastic bubble, and seeing everything through that plastic, it's like it's normal. But imagine taking away that plastic screen or that sheet of plastic in between you and reality, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, you know, it's like it's so much more vivid. It's yeah.
Excellent. One thing that you hear a lot about from people, why confession? What is the purpose of confession? Why must I confess?
Well, before there were psychologists, there was priests in confession, and so um, we have to confess because first and foremost, um, our sins are like, I put it this way: if anyone's ever been in a house that had bats, and you know the bat is banging around, what happens is there's this bat, this black winged thing banging around in your house. It's hitting the walls, it's screeching, it's pooping. You know, it's just like trying to get out. Are you going to sit down and have a nice meal with your family while this thing's banging around the walls, screeching? No,
Probably not.
no, you're not. You're not. In fact, the longer the bat's there, the more anxious you're going to be. And what do you have to do? You have to get the bat out. And so you got to open up a window, open the door, and let it out. And I would say that, you know, first and foremost, in the sense of not that it's the most important thing, but it's the thing that gets taken care of. Like, it's the most observable thing that gets taken care of in confession is we have these thoughts, we have these experiences that are causing us incredible amount of anxiety and pain. And 99% of the mental health issues are coming from what I'm speaking of, right? But because of the society we live in, um, therapists and mental health professionals, you know, are oftentimes just as intimidated as the person that's on the couch, if that makes sense. And so they don't want to tell them the truth. They don't want, you know, that's not the mo of the day. The mo of the day is just to affirm and validate and do all these things, and that's not the place of a therapist. The therapist isn't supposed to affirm or to validate, but that's what people do. And so what happens is the bat is kept in there, the windows are closed, and in fact sometimes more bats get in there, and this is where people start developing neuroses and all these things, right? So um, they need a psychiatrist instead of a psychologist, right? And so they need someone to start prescribing drugs to them because they need to calm down. So, anyways, the confession is the place in which the bat is let out. Now, once the bat is let out, it takes some time to clean up all the guano, all the poop that dropped everywhere, you know, to kind of get things back in order. And once things are back in order, then you can sit down and have a meal with your family, and that's communion. So once the anxiety, once all those things begin to calm down, things get put in order, you're able to have communion with God. And that's the purpose of confession, is that we're able to enter into a space where we are able to commune with God. But our sins get in the way of that. And so the confession is the place in which we're able to deal with them in a direct way. Does that make
Well,
sense?
yes, it does make sense. And what would you say to people who are afraid to confess? There's things that they've kept which have built the neurosis, but at the same time too, that's revealing the secrets, the things that they're afraid of people knowing, things like that.
Well, I would say that God already sees it. So that's part of the problem. Is that God sees it, but you don't have a way to really encounter God. And so it makes you want to hide, and you think that you can hide and you can't. Right? So the best thing to do is to recognize God already sees all this. God sees all my mess. Um, maybe, just maybe, God loves me. Maybe, just maybe, He isn't this thing that was looking to destroy me like everyone told me. You know what I mean? And you begin to develop a love and a trust for God. And then what happens is, once that love and that trust, there's just that hope and that desperation for it. Then you're able to experience that love and that trust, and then that anxiety you have about being exposed, it actually becomes a blessing, and that quote unquote exposure becomes the relief. It becomes the sunlight hitting that infected piece of flesh that's been hiding under that rotten, fetid, nasty band-aid that doesn't work anymore. That should have been taken off, years ago. And some fresh sunlight hits it, and some fresh, clean water hits it, and it's like it's painful at first because it's been, infected. But once you get past that initial sting, it's like, oh, I'm so glad to have this wound cleaned.
Throw some hydrogen peroxide on it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, all right. Well, you know what? I think that's actually a good segue too, as well, to what you mentioned a little while ago. What you wanted to talk about. What is a woman? We had that really good documentary that was just released by oh, what is his name? I can't even remember it.
Matt Wall.
Yeah, Matt Walsh. Yes, yes, yes. What is a woman? Which we've and as you pointed out as well, Father. We live in a society, as people like to say, but we live in a society now that
Society.
likes to say that whatever your neurosis is or whatever your conception is of yourself is real and it should be affirmed. And it's really accelerated quite a bit. I think there was always wackiness when we were kids and things like that. We saw things like that, and obviously there was differing opinions, but we've accelerated to a point now, even where you not only is what is a woman, that multiple personalities that people have somehow taken on, which you know, legion, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, that's good. There's like five of me within myself, and they're even having relationships. People are declaring to everyone now as well. So, what would you like to say about this, Father?
Yeah. There's nothing new under the sun. And as in the days of Noah, so shall be in the days the Son of Man returns. It's like um, demons are walking the earth, and they're vexing people, they're plaguing people, and I know people don't want to hear that either. And that fits into some stereotypes, right? People want to say, "Oh, okay, you think everything's demonic and blah blah blah." No, 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 no. There's mental health for sure, and there's people who need, like, believe me, mental health professional. I ran trauma and depression support groups for a few years. You know what I mean? Specializing in PTSD and using the STEP program that has been used at time with people in the military. So like, yeah, that's all there for sure. But it's the order of things, meaning the cause of it isn't these things that people are talking about. Those are the symptoms. The cause of them oftentimes have a very uniquely spiritual nature, and it's kind of like a weird, I hate to use it because the Lord used the mustard seed in a positive sense, but with his, may have mercy on me, I'm going to use it in a negative sense. But like, it's like a small mustard seed. It's like all it takes is one little real strong spiritual issue, and it goes undiagnosed and untreated, and then years down the line, you have full blown um, psychosomatic issues, right? Because the let's just say, for instance, in my experience, a lot of people who have unfortunately suffered from sexual abuse, molestation, things like that. There's a surprisingly high amount of people who are afflicted with demons who will have suffered some sort of sexual trauma. Why is that? Well, there's all kinds of reasons for it. But I'll say by the time they get to a therapist, whatever, or a psychiatrist, the issues that they're facing are real, and the neurons, those pathways, they have been wired in a certain way. I mean, if you have depression for 90 days, your neural pathways are rewired. So
Mhm.
in order for you to get out of that, you have to have a commiserate amount of time to get those processes, those neurological pathways rewired. But again, the thing is, that is the fruit of something. It's not the thing, right? So it's like you have to deal with the real issue. And so what psychiatrists will do, they'll go in, they'll pump people with drugs and stuff, and it may kind of like cover the symptom, but that root of what caused the despair that they have because they were molested, um, that absolute hatred of God, or all these things because their father molested them, that was never dealt with, right? And so because of that, it's just you're covering, you're sweeping that under the rug. And so these events can open up people to things like resentment, hatred, and that's demonic territory. Though that's prime for someone to now harness or be harnessed by these entities. You know.
What This is something that I've thought about a lot because it seems on an individual level, uh, yes, and then at a society level though too as well as at a society level, what have we done? I mean, let me see if I can expand upon this and see if it makes sense. So, and some of these things I've heard various people. You may have. I know Father Peter hears. And I'll try to keep it limited. And if I go too far, or if I'm getting manic and say too much, I feel my mind racing, so I have to rein it in a little bit. But as a society, we have set ourselves up, I think, in ways for things like this. If in the simplest of terms, we've conjured the demons. What I mean by that too, as well, is, I look at and you're fully aware, this audience, um, many of the people that follow us, they're either current or former military. And the military itself, the things that we've done, what we've participated in, what our job has been, oftentimes it's been presented as something that we are there to do good. And part of that doing good is we sometimes have to kill people, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. However, I look at the bloodshed in places like, say, Iraq, where there's maybe 1 million people who were killed, and there still continues to be since the invasion of Iraq. Wanton destruction. And to me, it seems as if there's some form of blood sacrifice that has occurred at that level. And it also has me concerned as well in the country, because we've seen such a leftward shift, that there is a group of people that are getting more and more angry that do have the weapons. And at some point, they might snap. I do see the left trying to contain those people, but when they have their way, they want to have their righteous justice, and whatever their righteous justice is, um, in their minds, right? But what that really does is that it just unleashes more, right? Because it just begats more, and more evil gets begat. Does that make sense at all? What I'm saying and what
Yeah,
I'm driving at?
yeah, yeah. It makes total sense, and that's another reason why the Christ doesn't lead us to quote unquote like a morality, although there's moral aspects to being a Christian. It's you are in relationship and connection and life and discipleship with the living God. So the reason why I'm saying it that way is that there are things that, according to whatever your bias, whatever your paradigm is, seems like the right way to go. There is a way in which it seems right for a man to go, but that way leads into death. And so this is one of those things where, discernment is an incredibly profound gift that the fathers talk about, and it's the ability to know not just like what's good and bad in regards of like, you know apple pie, like, whatever our moral standards are for the day, but it's like what is good and what is evil in the eternal sense of like what does God say? And you got to be careful because this is why there's so many saints. You'll get one saint like Saint Nestor, who was the page, or the kind of like the servant of Saint Demetrius. It's like, there's this guy Nestor, and he's this gladiator for the empire, and he's blaspheming and doing all these things. And Nestor's like, he goes to Saint Demetrius and says, "Hey, let me fight this guy." And Saint Demetrius, like, he's like, "Yeah, God bless you." He's like, "You'll kill him, but like the empire will kill you." He's like, "Fine." So he goes into combat and he kills him. And he kills him. It's blessed, and then he gets martyred. King David, the slaying of Goliath. Like, there's so many things that are there, but does that mean like anybody can go pick up and kill whoever you want? No. Why is that? Because there is a very, it's forgive the plug, but it's a royal path. It's a narrow path, and it's very personal. So like, there's a kind of general thing that we all adhere to in regards to morality. It's like, yeah, basically do unto others as you have do unto them. That's our morality essentially, right, as Christians. But there becomes something very particular where God's going to say something to Doc that He's not going to say to me. He's going to say something to me that He's not going to say to you, and that isn't something. It's not relative in that sense because it's never going to be so outside of the tradition, so outside of our accepted morality, where it's like, oh, I don't know about that. You know what I mean? But it is very personal, and so the reality of the need to listen to God. And this is why it can't just be like kind of like the check mark. Like, okay, I said my prayers, check mark, because you never know what's going to come down the pike that day, especially in the days we're living in. It's like you've got to have you've got to have your CB on all the time, right? In regards of like connecting with God and listening to God, because you never know. And you got to know the basics. You got to know your basics, right? You got to have your foundation. But on top of the foundation, just know that there's marching orders for all of us. And I think that's just important to understand because um, so many people get lost because they're not aware of that. And they want to go on autopilot. And that's what God doesn't want autopilot. He doesn't want robots and automatons.
So that made me think back to something else that I was thinking about as well. That it's something that I've stumbled upon, and I think even Doc, you and I talked about this the last time. I've got a neighbor; he's a Protestant guy, and um, I got those. Father Peter Heers has suggested from the monastery that's out of Colorado the New Testaments. You've got the Gospels, and then you've got the Epistles and Revelation, and everything like that. Two separate, very interesting translations. Very very cool. And we got into discussion of that a little bit, and I was talking to him too because I had it there, and he was just asking kind of what I was reading, and I was talking about how great this was and the idea of the church fathers, you know, um, and what he came to me was with, well, if I him if he is able to read the Bible and then just pray to the Holy Spirit, that he will understand the meaning of the text itself. And what say you to that, Father?
No, no, no. We need the fathers to help us. And um, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, we need the fathers to help us. And um, I mean, there comes a point where someone can receive the grace of God to such a degree that they are enlightened by the Holy Spirit, but but all that means is that they'll be able to hear what the fathers are teaching with clarity, if that makes sense. The the problem that we have is that so many people, out of their pride and their delusion, they think like, oh yeah, I can simply understand whatever, and I'm hearing from God. But how do you know that? Um, the fact is that there's one body, one baptism, one spirit, which is St. Paul says in the book of Ephesians, chapter 4. So how is it that like you have this whole stretch of the life of the church and holy tradition for over 2,000 years, and now all of a sudden because you come along, it's like that's wrong? Or all of a sudden because some dude in Germany in like the 1600s came along? You know what I mean? Like it's people, if you break it down like that, it should really help people to kind of think like, yeah, I guess that does seem kind of weird, right? It's like if you're really into all the stuff, right? Left Behind, Rapture, all that stuff. Okay, look. Well, the timeline, if you're into all that stuff, is like things get worse, not better, right? So
Mhm.
if things are getting worse, then that means as we've gone along, people's understanding and connection to God and ability to speak on the things of God, including Scripture, has gotten worse. Therefore, things like Protestantism are part of that kind of end times disintegration, right? You would think that like no, you need to kind of like go back to where there was this obviously evident experience of God that transformed society, right? So that's the church, right? So reducing it down to the hyper individualism that people are talking about, where I alone have the magic keys, that's dangerous. And we know it's dangerous because why is there so many several thousand denominations now?
Well, and I mean, absolutely with that. And that's one of the things I find it's to me, okay, I look at the recent scientism in many ways that we have, where there's this faith in something that is constantly changing in front of us, whatever the truth happens to be at that point. But it's part of that outgrowth of man's rational mind. We can just figure it out on our own, and we'll just keep going down this pathway of us figuring it out. It kind of falls in line too as well with some of the things that we discussed with the psychology. But it's sort of, if it came out around 100, they probably didn't know what they were talking about. I mean,
Yeah,
sure, these might have been some people that even were with Christ, but what do they know what they were talking about? Or maybe they taught some of these people. It's this bizarre notion that everything that comes out of the past somehow needs to be rebelled against, and we will progress past that. Um, which is bizarre too, as well, because some of these same people will quote like Aristotle and Socrates, but then the early church fathers we reject, and somehow the guy in Germany or the guy in Switzerland or whoever it was at that point, they've suddenly found something new, or maybe it's the guy in Waco. you
right,
know, uh,
right.
you know, uh, he's got a new revelation.
Exactly. So these are so problematic, and everyone has seen the fruit of these problems. This isn't something we have to discuss at length because if people are honest, they know in their hearts that something is wrong. You know.
Doc, I've been kind of monopolizing it.
No,
Do
you're
you have
good,
some
dude. But
questions?
on that last point, it's like, yeah, it's hard to have that inward look, and it's funny that you say that, Father, because even now, like I think I talked about it on the last one, where I have my life confession coming up, and then there's so much that you don't realize that it is that you are doing or that you have done, and then once you start
Mhm.
actually going through every little thing, you realize how much you have to account for. And that's one thing that my priest also told me. It was like people are scared of Orthodoxy because it pushes all these things to the light that you didn't realize before. And like you said, it does open your eyes, and you see kind of like on Sunday, like I can't imagine like the blind man all of a sudden being able to see and having that experience. And
Right.
that's what this feels like, because it's like it's a lot of accountability, it's a lot of really looking in deep, and you're like, well, okay, I gotta account for all these things that I've done, and really be good. But like you said, it does feel like like I'm anxious about it, but at the same time, it's like something I know that afterwards I'm just gonna feel so relieved and just
Oh, so
getting
relieved,
that out of the
so
way.
relieved. Yeah, so relieved, and it's great because we begin to really taste to see that the Lord is good and that His mercy endures forever. And it isn't cheesy. It isn't just a slogan. It's true, you know. And he who has sinned much, he who has been forgiven much loves much. And I think that's the thing to really kind of keep in mind with all this is that the love that you begin to experience from God, it changes you, and then you're able to love your family. You're able to love your life. You're able to love life, even in the midst of such confusion and chaos. You're able to find the pearl of good price, and you'll sell everything for it. This is why we are in the church, because we found something that is immeasurably precious to us. You know. So,
Father, you know something you had mentioned before, and I don't even know that I've ever completely heard why. You were in Iraq and you were in Kosovo. Why were you there?
oh, MWR.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, MWR. Yeah.
So were you working for MWR?
I went over there. I played. You know, I
Was
played.
that some
So
of the Doom? The Doom
no,
band?
no, 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 no. It was two different bands. One band was like a kind of like we played covers. Both bands we would do covers, but it was like one band was kind of like alternative 90s like rock whatever. It wasn't really my thing, but I did it for the experience. And then the other one was another band which was kind of like this band the Cobra. We were like, if I don't know if you've ever heard this band. There's this band back in the day, Sly the Family Stone.
Oh yes.
So
It's a family affair.
so if Sly and the Family Stone were doing the Pink Floyd version of a Black Sabbath song, um, yeah, that
I don't
that's
even know where that is, but I like the sound of it.
yeah, that's what we were. That's the band.
Monkeys, funky psychedelic stoner rock.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah. That band was called Tread the Cobra, and we went over to Iraq, and the other one was a band called Old Man Down, and we went over to Kosovo and Sarajevo and Macedonia and stuff, the Balkans. Great experiences, and I grew up. Some of my first experiences into manhood were hanging out with some Marines, out of El Toro Marine Base.
Okay, yeah, that's right. El Toro. That's not even there anymore, is it?
No, it doesn't
No, it's
exist.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's, I mean, shout out to Mike and shout out to Fang. I got shout out to Gump. Those were guys who really kind of like took me under their wing. I was a youngster. They were all from the East Coast. They all knew East Coast hardcore, Cro-Mags,
Oh yeah.
Day, all that stuff. They're the ones who really kind of like got me into that, and they really kind of got me into like kind of what it means to be a man in that sense too, because they were Marines and like they did Marine stuff like off base, and so I was hanging with them, and I learned a lot from them, and that's kind of where it began. My association with the military directly. Like my dad was in the military, my uncles were in the military, but like my dad got discharged, and then my sister, she had married a guy. He was in the army. He was stationed out in Carolinas. Like it was kind of like a thing in regards of playing in the background, like way in the background. But it was those brothers that I was hanging out with in El Toro. They really that's where I really began to have like a kind of relationship. And so for me to do that work with MWR and just to go over there and to serve and to in that very limited capacity was a real honor because I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is, but I have always gotten along well with military. I just it clicks. I get it. I think in a different life I probably would have been military myself, if my life had gone a little bit differently. So yeah, yeah.
Or you could have just lied like I did to join. There's different ways to go. You want to hear something funny? Because I'm sure the statute of limitations is long past on this.
10
So I
years is pretty
originally
good.
went, and hey, you think, but who knows? Oh well. I started it. I started something, and I'm really not so sure. But so anyway, so number one, like I have that sort of punk rock, sort of upbringing, things like that. Nobody thought I would join the military. Now, what happened was it was on my birthday, um, and I had a vehicle. I had this old Volvo, and I didn't know much about cars back then. Wasn't kind of just that way. Like I liked the car because it looked cool, sort of thing. I bought it from a friend. I took it into the shop, and it was going to. The brakes were basically rusted. It was going to be massive amounts of money to get that vehicle repaired. I didn't have a job at the moment. I was in between because I was supposed to be heading off to art school at the time, and I was just like, you know what, like just one of those wacky moments. Like, okay, I'm gonna go, and I went in. I took the ASVAB, the AFQT, and I scored fairly well on it. And they were trying to offer me the different jobs, and then they found out about like I was honest. I was honest about the drugs that I did with that guy. And suddenly you find your options into the military at that point are very limited. And so I completely called it off at that point. Well, for him, I called it off. I ended up traveling completely 800 miles away to a different city, joined the military there. I just went there. I got the ASVAB score. I told them, I was like, yeah, I smoked marijuana once. I pulled the Bill Clinton on that one. I didn't inhale. Totally pulled that one. And it went over. But I tell you what, not going to lie, because I was still, you're signing those documents, right? And I was just like, oof. And I also at the same time too, I thought I really got away with something at that point too. Now, you come to find out too after you join, what's hilarious too in boot camp is there's those guys that really just can't cut it. And then they're willing to admit and probably just make up stories that they've done, going to the chaplain, trying to find an excuse to get out and everything like that. But that was one thing that I couldn't do because of the kind of person that I was. Nobody thought that I was going to make it into the military, like that I would even complete it. And so just out of my own obstinance, I had to complete the process. I had to finish boot camp, like I had to get it done just so I could prove everybody wrong on that point, like that. And then at the same time, too, though, to your point, Father, and it's like why Doc and I am talking here, and you know, kind of like the page, what we're all about. Like we are. There's a lot of people that were just kind of misfits, but at the same time, too, there's a duty and there's an honor. And Doc and I, we met because of the different pages that we run, but there's a lot of us out there. And that's also too why, I wanted you to come on here and help out too, just to give some guidance to people, because there's so many guys out there who either currently are or have been in, and especially as crazy as the world is now. And I hear it, I mean, every day from these people, especially like with the mandates that they've had. And just seeing the world too, like realizing how crazy things are and crazy this country is, and wondering like who can they believe in. And I always, what I always come back to though too in my mind, but it's from Psalm 145, the trust ye not in princes and the son of mints, and whom there is of no salvation. That's something that sticks in my mind. And it was I was at liturgy this weekend, and I remember that really, like, I don't know why it jumped out at me then. Yeah. And it was funny too, because I don't remember exactly, but it was in John this weekend too. That was the homily was from that. And it reiterated that. So that was what was really interesting as well. Do you remember the verse from this weekend?
Oh, I'd have to look it up, but
Yeah, it was from John, but it reiterates that point as well,
yeah,
about entrusted in the middle of this world. And I think that's something as well that dramatic pause. We You can trust a certain level and a certain number of people, and obviously us who have served in the military, we have a lot of um, the best people and the worst people I've met were in the military.
yeah,
um,
yeah.
and but at the same time too, you know, and I think Doc, you can attest to this, and I'm sure as well, Father. Like, there's a lot of really good people in these Orthodox churches, and I can't speak for every Orthodox church. I don't want it to sound as if I'm excusing that, because wherever there are men, there are going to be bad things and there's going to be bad people. I just know that to this point, with the different churches that I've attended and the different people I've met, and again, you've got to go to different churches and meet different people. It's a strong character that you're going to find that's a similar kind of character to the people that you have in the military. And I think some of it as well is the obedience factor. You're all kind of in it together. You realize it's a tough road.
It is. It is. And so, even I would just say to anybody listening and have that background, God wants to and can use every aspect of our lives and does, and you know, instead of it's like Paul when he was called, he was a tent maker, and he even says like we're to stay in the location in which we were first called, and I think that for people to feel like if what they do or who they are, or whatever, is an obstacle to coming to the Lord, coming to the church, it's not. It's not like the military. It's like the only thing that you need, the only qualification you need to join the church is to be humble and to be willing, and God takes care of the rest. So you'll have to forgive me, brothers, but speaking of God and prayer, I have to sign off now. And
Well, Father, one last thing before you go. I know you had to cut out, and I knew you were going to cut out. Beyond that, if there's anything else, like what else would you suggest beyond what you've suggested for any of the young men and women as well? I don't want to limit it because we do have a lot of women as well.
I think I would just suggest, like I said, taste and see. Um, there's so much content. I know that I don't want to put you out there too much, but um, I think if they would just contact you and get, a good lead on good content, but then the content's only going to take you so far. And at some point in time, it's going to be the time to go to a service to actually begin to talking with a priest. And from there, just pray. And with a sincere prayer, asking God to lead you to the right place. Um, Believe it or not, it'll happen. I mean, I went out and I went all the way to Saipan to baptize somebody. So it's like, um,
You had to go into quarantine as well to do
I
that.
did, I did. So
Yeah.
like anything's possible, guys. But you just have to be willing to ask. Jesus says you have not because you ask not.
In one really, I want to add onto that, and then we can sign off here. One thing that I've noticed often, and I myself was guilty of this as well, when I first joined the church, one to become a catechumen, then another thing even to, um, be prepared to be baptized or chrismated as a priest. Are you looking for feedback from people on that for them to say when they're ready to do that?
Um, what do you mean?
Well, just input, be like, hey, I've been going to your church for a few months now. I think I'm ready to become a catechumen, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of open to that for sure. They have to be open to me saying like, "Oh, you're not ready."
Oh, no, no. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I don't want to say that. Like, they make that decision. But you know what I've seen sometimes from people is they just they're like, well, yeah, he never asked me to be, you know, and it may not just be with you, but I've seen that in other churches.
Yeah, yeah,
So anyway,
yeah.
all right, Father, I appreciate so much you taking the time and spending some time with us today. It was very, very fruitful.
It was my joy. My joy. God bless you guys and your work here, and forgive me if I've said anything that's caused anybody any confusion or anything. So
For sure. Awesome. Thank you so much, Father. And you know, I think it's probably good too for us, Doc, if you've got anything final to say.
No, I just love just kind of touch back on like what Father was saying too. Is like a lot of us come from really like bad and like crazy backgrounds, but it's so amazing what with God and His grace, like what He can do with like such wretches, like ourselves. So
Yes.
that's pretty much it for me, you know.
yeah.
Right on. All right, guys. Well, thanks everybody for listening, or if you're checking this out later. And be sure to check out again. Father Turbo has a podcast. It's called The Royal Path. It comes out weekly. I believe it usually comes out like Wednesday ish. You know, it's Father Turbo with two other of his spiritual children,
Yeah.
and it's a really good podcast. They dive into they've been doing a lot of the Nicene Creed, but then you know, a little bit kind of
I'll,
diving into a few other things as well.
I'll
But a
post
lot
it in
of
the chat.
kind of bringing current topics as well.
Oh
Awesome.
yeah, please. And again, I just want to encourage anybody: take advantage of Doc and Seraphim, and get out there, guys. Get into it. Um, don't be shy. You know, so get into it.
Awesome. Yeah. So this is Romeo, aka Seraphim, and we are out.